Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on advanced proposal writing strategies. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to join us today. I am Mallory Price and will be monitoring today's session. Reminder for all APMP members, this webinar applies to your continuing education units for certification. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the questions tab of your control panel. And at the end of the webinar, we will answer as many of those as we can, time permitting. All right, before we get into some introductions and things, I wanted to talk a little bit about what Shipley does. We started as a training company over 50 years ago and expanded into consulting and process improvement. Of course, we still offer training on the corporate level or for individuals who want to win more contracts. This webinar is just one small taste of what we offer. And so we will get into our agenda here. We will start with introductions of Nia and Kevin. And then we'll dive into an overview of data-driven proposal writing. Then the importance of market intelligence and what that means for your proposal writing. Then we'll dive into developing discriminators, features, and benefits. Then client requirements analysis and competitor analysis, and then integrating all of that data into proposals. All right, so without further ado, Nia and Kevin, would you introduce yourselves a little bit to us? We'll start with Nia.
Sure. My name is Nia Mahalati. I am Senior Vice President of Professional Services for Shipley, and I will be serving as our webinar's facilitator today. And with that, I will turn it over to Kevin.
Thank you, Nia. Thank you, Mallory. Really appreciate the invitation to join you in this webinar. I'm Kevin Plexico. I'm Senior Vice President of Information Solutions at Deltek, and I manage the GovWin market intelligence platform and research team at Deltek. So really good to be with you.
All right, thank you both. All right, let's dive in. Nia, I will pass the mic to you.
Sounds good. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are honored to have you. We're going to try to have a limitation on this to about 45 minutes. And with that, welcome to Advanced Proposal Writing Strategies webinar. The focus of this webinar today and the topic will be leveraging data-driven strategies to enhance proposal success. So essentially, that means systematic processes. But what does it really mean? What is advanced proposal writing? It's essentially specific techniques on how to move your score beyond just a good or it's outstanding. So case in point, a lot of organizations, they get their proposal debriefs back from the client, for instance, and they notice they've made down select, they've made it down to the top 3, they're all excited. They get their debrief scored, and the scores essentially reflect an outstanding in the technical volume, for instance, and they still lost. So this is where this speaks to why that happens. This is essentially how to increase your score from an outstanding to a far exceeds. There's a difference there. It's a nuance, right? In government contracting, we talk about moving the scoring from a green to a blue, right? So you can still be outstanding and lose, but far exceeds really means you far exceed the client expectations and the competition, and that's where you win. So here, advanced proposal writing techniques are to get you from outstanding to far exceeds to get you to that win. This is primarily for competitive procurements that are best value, right? So given that all stakeholders have formal and very delineated scoring processes that are documented, evaluated, and kept on file, regardless of the industry, this could be business to government, it could be business to business, all stakeholders have this due to what we call in GovCon protests, and in business to business, they don't want to get sued essentially, right? So there is a delineated process. With that, advanced proposal writing addresses specific strategies to address their scoring. It's a technique so you can essentially maximize your points to win. So it's, in a nutshell, it's how to apply systematic processes in proposals and by providing highly data-driven responses. So how does GovWin fit into this? They are a remarkable source of data, and that's why we have the honor of having Deltek GovWin's Senior VP on this webinar because he's going to talk about how to aggregate and present that data in a way that's going to position you to increase your PWIN, your chances of winning, essentially. So with that, we can go on to the next slide. So overview of data-driven proposal writing, I think we touched on that a little bit. The science part of this is really what data has been collected, analyzed, and is being presented. So in the world of government contracting, essentially this means capture, right? So with that, I'll let you know that for 54 years, Shipley has conducted analysis on thousands of proposals. We have a data analyst, and their only job is to identify patterns in winning and losing. And that's when it comes down to the data. The proposals that have data in them, that is condensed, packed data, are the ones that win. They have the highest chances of winning. We've seen this continuously for over 50 years. So the focus of this webinar essentially is once the RFP drops, even if there was very little time to do capture, no capture was done, as we've all been in situations where we were directed to bid, and the reasoning for this, we were told, is because the client loves us, not to be further defined, and we do this stuff. And I say this with quotes because I think that we're certainly going to have participants on this call that can relate to that. At that point, we have to pursue. We don't have a choice. How do we increase and position ourselves to win there? What we recommend is we go with the 4 C's of Shipley: the client, the customer, the company next, and the cost last on best value, right? That's not to say the cost is not important. In government contracting, it's always a main criteria, but they can't say that. So essentially, focusing on client and customer is not going to mislead you, while keeping in mind that your cost has to remain competitive. So that's part of doing your research in terms of how much money does this client have, how much is the competition going to potentially be bidding this opportunity at. That's where GovWin really comes in. So having said that, what happens when the RFP drops, regardless of whether you've done the capture or not? We recommend at Shipley that you spend 20% of your time running capture before you write anything at all, whether you've ran capture for 3 years or not at all, meaning you go back to the drawing board, you establish what are the client needs, how is the competition positioned, who are they, how can I far exceed those 2 criteria. So the difference between outstanding and far exceeds is outstanding means we do this stuff, as we talked about. We do this stuff is not going to win our proposal, depending on who is bidding and what the client wants. We have to own the stuff. In order to own the stuff in that industry, it is not possible to do that without knowing what the client wants, specifically beyond what's on their website and what the competition is doing. And that is where the data comes in. That's where the advanced proposal writing comes in. That's where we write, we are better because we increased this by X%. We did it on 72 contracts. We plan on applying it here, and here's how. And with that, we'll move on to the next slide. And then I'll turn it over to Kevin, who can tell you how we can use the tools in GovWin to explain how we derive the client and the competitive data.
Thank you, Nia. I really appreciate the invitation from Shipley and you and Mallory to join this webinar. Definitely will not make this an infomercial about GovWin. Just the briefest of summaries of GovWin. I know we share a lot of the same customers, so many of, I'm sure your customers are already familiar with GovWin as a market intelligence platform. But for those who may be less familiar, GovWin, essentially, we have a research team as well as data aggregation tools to bring together all the transparency information that's relevant to a contractor into a single platform to help you find opportunities, build your pipeline, as well as provide you the intelligence that you need to be successful in those opportunities in terms of information about the agency as well as the competitive environment. So big picture, a lot of the things that we're going to talk about here in terms of the value of market intelligence for the proposal team, I think is just just to backstop here, GovWin is a great source for this kind of information, and we believe that we serve it up in a way that makes it really easy to consume and easy to get to versus relying on some of the public sources that you can go to get some of this information. I guess the one thing I would start with is I typically, in a lot of companies we deal with, oftentimes I hear from the proposal shop that they sort of view the responsibility of the customer intimacy and the customer knowledge to come from the BD team, and they don't necessarily think of it as part of their role to know the customer. And I guess I would say generally, I think you do want to rely on your business development team for that inside information and their relationship. But you do still want to definitely have access to your own resources and tools for keeping current on the opportunity. You know, an amendment drops on something, you don't want to be waiting until the BD person tells you tomorrow. You need to know right away. It's going to affect your weekend. It's going to affect your week, as well as information about the strategy, the strategic plan of the agency, companies you're bidding against. It's important for you, I think, as a proposal team and a proposal manager to really immerse yourself in the mindset of the agency and how they're going to evaluate the bids, and drawing on that transparency that we have in this market that's so unique. So with that, you can go to the next slide. Big picture, obviously now more than ever, it's important to have your mind and your eyes on what's going on in the market. Some of these things are not to scale. The new administration obviously is touching on all of these trends. This is from just a snapshot of a report that we produced at the beginning of this year, identifying the top trends for contractors in the year ahead. And the new administration is literally touching every one of these. From a budget and spending environment, as you think about specific agencies, it's been very uneven in terms of how agencies are spending money, as well as what we've seen in terms of the reductions in force in different agencies. The DoD is talking about laying off people, but hasn't really moved forward in any actions, whereas organizations like GSA, the Office of Personnel Management, have already taken action. So just profound changes that we haven't seen in agencies. And as I said, it varies from agency to agency. So it's really important as you're working on proposal for particular customers, make sure that contact is still there. Like they might have turned over. Make sure you know who you're dealing with and who's still around. And that's real-time information that I think you need to have. When we talk about pricing, obviously economic conditions are having a big impact on the pricing of companies and should be something that you're thinking about. Tariffs on agencies could affect your supply chain if you're counting on products and products are part of your proposals. Understanding how, if you're doing a fixed price contract, what kind of risk you're taking on by bidding a fixed price when tariffs could have an impact on your pricing. So just something to keep in mind as you're thinking about your pricing strategies, your labor costs, your product costs, and your suppliers, what type of impact the sort of dynamic environment might affect there. And then a couple more I'll just touch on. Cybersecurity. I know compliance around cybersecurity has been front of mind for many companies. If you're in the defense world and you're touching controlled unclassified data, they're asking you to sign on to CMMC and get your CMMC certifications. There's been a lot of discussion with the Trump administration about deregulation, and we've gotten questions around, is CMMC still going to be around? Might they get rid of it? Just as a little indicator, CMMC was actually born under the prior Trump administration, so we don't think it's going anywhere from that point of view. And if you're paying attention to the leadership in DoD and the IT organization, Katie Arrington, who was sort of the brainchild for CMMC under the prior Trump administration, has been rehired by the Trump administration to be the CIO for the Department of Defense. So cybersecurity is probably not the area where deregulation is going to be taking place. And then the last area I'll just talk about here in top trends is around sort of regulation, small business policy, and compliance. Small business regulations are as we all know, very complex. The teaming relationships can be very complex. The rules around joint ventures, we're seeing a lot of small businesses and large business engage in joint venture the mentor-protege joint venture programs as a way of strengthening their past performance and bidding on opportunities. So your teaming strategy now is more important than ever. I would say this is one area where we have heard from the new SBA administrator that just was hired within the last 2 weeks that their day one strategy was, we want to look at ways we can streamline the small business regulations because they are so complicated. So I think just paying attention to the compliance environment and acquisition reforms. I don't think we've seen a leader for the Office of Federal Acquisition Policy and Procurement Policy, OFPP, within OMB be named yet. So I think acquisition policy and IT policies are very much still being formulated, and so it's just really important to pay attention to these regulations to the effect that they change, how you bid on something, what kind of regulations you might have to comply with. And as I'm sure Nia can tell you, you don't want to wait around until an RFP drops to find out what compliance requirements you're going to have. You really need to be building those compliance capabilities long before you're working on a proposal, because the chances are they're going to need you to have those capabilities in place at the time of your proposal submission. And that's not always something that you can control the clock on. Next slide. And then, real time, just want to give you some real time information on what's going on within agencies and what they're responding to with some recent executive orders. I think these all came out within the last 2 weeks. There was an executive order specifically challenging agencies to formulate reductions in force plans. Similarly, in that same executive order, there was a challenge to agencies to explore their real estate and their real property footprint to see what their space needs were going to be, as well as challenging agencies to think about whether they can relocate staff or functions outside the DC area. You can see why those might go hand in hand. If they're going to reduce the number of people here in the DC area and they think they need to backstop it by setting up people in new locations, that they can do those together, but those are expected on the same date. Agencies were challenged to put a pause on their contracting in many cases, to reevaluate those priorities to make sure they're still priorities. So I think there was a 30-day call for agencies to reevaluate their spending, and at the same time put in place mechanisms that they report on their spending and specifically call out the justification for each spend action that they make and make that publicly available. We're a market intelligence firm in the public sector. We love publicly available information. Give us more and we'll take advantage of it. And hopefully within GovWin, we can help you get better insight into those justifications to understand why is the agency making these investments. And that's going to be important for you to understand why are they moving forward with certain contracts. And then lastly, I'll just mention briefly, consulting is another area that agencies have targeted. There was specifically a memo that came out from the new administrator of GSA wanting to target the top 10 consulting firms. So these are, Accenture, Booz Allen, Deloitte's of the world. And I think what they're going to find is that more of those consulting firms are doing essential work than non-essential work. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And we can go to the next slide. I want to talk about the unique opportunity that you all have in this public sector world. We're sort of blessed with the public nature of the business that we engage in. Since we do business in the government market, they're required to provide transparency on what they're doing, and that gives us a really unique opportunity in this industry to leverage that transparency to our advantage in our bidding and our proposals. This comes out in the firm of acquisition through what they call the integrated acquisition environment. This is a statutory requirement of a set of programs that GSA operates for the most part that is designed to provide tools for acquisition professionals, but also out of those acquisition professional tools, there's data that's available to the customers and the agency contractors to get insight into that data. The Federal Procurement Data System is the system of record for contract activity. If you've paid any attention to the DOGE receipt board, the Board of Receipts that they call it, you've actually seen screenshots of USA spending, which is basically a representation of that FPDS data. And then I'm sure all of you have used SAM at some point in your lives to get access to specific procurement opportunities. And then we've also seen agencies required to have companies that they do business with, and even their subcontractors, register with SAM.gov and get that unique entity identifier, which is sort of the replacement for the old DUNS number that they used to use, so that you can get specific information about specific agency accounts and the customers they're doing business with and who those companies are. If you go to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit deeper about some of this data and how it can be helpful. So let's talk about, let's say, an example of competitive intelligence that you might be doing. One of the things you get about companies is their sort of I would say, firmographic information. Where are they located? Who are their headquarters locations? Do they have any other organizations that they're affiliated with? Their socioeconomic status. They're required to do these certifications on an annual basis. So if you're talking to a subcontractor and they say that they are a certain type of subcontractor and they meet certain size criteria and they're engaged in certain primary NAICS codes, like, don't necessarily have to take their word for it. You can go to SAM, log in, and actually verify that information. And keep in mind, that's what the government agency is going to be looking at when they're verifying this information. They're going to want to make sure that that SAM record is current and accurate. And if it's not, you're going to want to tell that subcontractor to make sure they've got their SAM entity registration record accurate. The federal procurement data system can be really invaluable when you're trying to compare your past performance versus your competitors' past performance. So let's say I'm bidding on a case management system or a customer support, like tech support procurement, and I think I'm going to be bidding against these 4 or 5 companies. You can literally go in and see that company's set of contracts that have certain kinds of keywords and NAICS codes and see what the depth of their past performance is compared to yours, and use that as an opportunity to sort of give yourself a sense for how strong is your past performance going to be compared to the other bidders that you're going against, and maybe even use it as an opportunity to say, well, maybe we're missing some. I've talked to many companies that don't have a system of record internally that is shared with their internal business development and program management teams for what is their past performance. They find themselves scrambling with other account teams. Hey, did we have a contract in XYZ agency? Didn't we do this for somebody else? So it can sometimes help reveal past performance records that you might not know about through the word of mouth in your corporation that you can use to go strengthen your past performance. And then subcontracting reporting, a lot of times, when you're dealing with small businesses, you don't necessarily have a prime history to draw on, but with the requirement of subcontracting reporting, you can actually get visibility into where a company has subcontracts that can serve as sort of a proxy for their past performance in the federal market that agencies will look to. And then I will just mention, last but not least, make sure you're not doing business with an organization that is excluded or suspended from doing work. We don't run into these too often, but it's certainly something that the government is going to run into and check. They're not allowed to do business with companies that are debarred or suspended, and you want to make sure they don't show up on your team unintentionally. If you go to the next slide, we can talk about sort of how you can apply this in terms of market intelligence as a proposal manager or somebody who's working on a proposal. So I like to think about it this way. Yes, you're dependent upon the business development team for giving you that insight into, like, hey, what's our strategy? What's our capture plan? What's the win themes that we're going to have? But peeling that back a layer deeper, when you're working on a proposal that may be 50 or 100 pages, it's often helpful to weave in what the agency's strategy is, and recognizing that their strategy and how this particular win theme ties to their strategy. Sometimes they provide specific examples of maybe case volume or data points that you can weave into your proposal that really show the agency that you know something about them that's more than just what a business development person is going to collect for you. Similarly, competitive intelligence, we already talked about that a little bit with modeling sort of your past performance versus what you can glean from public data about another company's past performance. It won't necessarily tell you whether they did well or not well on that, but if there was a recompete opportunity and somebody else won it, maybe that customer wasn't happy with that particular company and they decided to move on. Sometimes it's for totally innocuous reasons, but sometimes those things like not executing options or not renewing a contract and going with a different company can provide you insight to maybe weaknesses in their armor around their past performance. And then agency and market analysis. I think, again, we talked about this in the first slide. Now more than ever, you're looking at agencies and it's very different from the prior administration. The EPA's strategy today versus what it was at the beginning part of January when the Biden administration was in control couldn't be more different. And I would say the same with GSA. We're seeing a big move in terms of the policy shifts within GSA. Same with the State Department. We've seen the sort of sunset of a lot of foreign aid. I know many companies are involved in foreign aid, and all of a sudden those dollars are disappearing and getting reprioritized. So So now more than ever, you need to be really mindful of what are the policy shifts that are taking place within the agencies you're doing business with, and make sure that's accommodated in your proposal, and that you're sort of weeding out things that are maybe political messages from a prior administration and weaving in maybe some of those political messages into the proposal where it makes sense. You're not trying to force it, but where it makes sense. And then I know most of you are familiar with GovWin already from an opportunity tracking point of view, but if you're not, obviously we track thousands and thousands of opportunities in GovWin, and the chances are one you're bidding on is already something we're tracking, and we have a real-time sync between SAM. So if you're relying on SAM for your notifications of opportunities, like an amendment comes out, typically the way they send out their notifications is you get the notification the next morning. Within GovWin, we provide real-time alerts. So you can bookmark an opportunity and get notified literally 15 minutes after that amendment's released. So you're not waiting till tomorrow to find out about an amendment that maybe delayed an RFP or added an amendment that significantly changed the work on the proposal that you're working on today. So I thought this was really helpful, hopefully to give you an idea or maybe provoke some thought in terms of how you engage as a proposal manager in market data that you can weave into your proposal, that you can provide guidance to the other people in the organization that might be collaborating on that proposal, and unleashing the value of this data to strengthen your bid, to strengthen your proposal, and show the agency that you really have some awareness of what they're working on, what they're dealing with, and that's baked into your proposal to strengthen your pursuit. So I hope that provides some insight to the customers. I'm going to turn it back over to you to talk about how this gets woven into their actual proposal work.
No, absolutely, it does. Thank you so much, Kevin. And this is why Shipley and GovWin are such a match, actually. And I can tell you this, as part of leading Shipley training, we have about 22 trainings a month, every month, and in every single in-person course that we have and virtual, participants bring up GovWin for this very reason, and it's specifically GovWin. We don't have any affiliation or contractual or legal connection with GovWin. It's just our appreciation genuinely for this tool and how much it brings to the table in terms of positioning and winning. So really appreciate that, Kevin. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. So the next slide, we discuss, okay, how now we've got this data that we have, we've gone and we've looked at our clients, or we've looked at the competition, what have we determined? Here is where we start developing discriminators, features, and benefits. If we were in capture and 5 years ahead, that's where we would start doing it. Historically, we want you to, and we have always said as Shipley, try to get out in front of the opportunity as much as possible. Just like Kevin said, the more time you have, the higher your PWIN may be because you have more time to prepare. Ideally, when the RFP drops, you should have a notional pink team. If it's not a formal document, then it's something that looks like a management volume, a technical volume, an idea of a price because you want to have that coincide with your technical, and an idea of what the key personnel past performance looks like. If you don't have all of that and the RFP drops, you have to now create your discriminators, your features and benefits now. It's better to take the time to do that by doing the research, like Kevin said, versus going back. And one of the points that he made is we don't want to copy and paste what we had that may be talking to a previous administration that may not be as relevant. Let's take that time, even if we have to run capture simultaneous to writing, to develop an understanding of the client and the competition so that we have features and benefits that are relevant to this market, to this time, and to this opportunity, and to this client. So I'll give you a specific example, because talking about this theoretically versus applying it pragmatically, and I can tell you this because I teach a lot of our courses every month to the C-suites of these corporations, so I know the specific examples are more beneficial. So I'll give you one right now. Number one, when we're talking about developing features and benefits, yes, this is something that Shipley came up with. It is industry standard. You see it in most proposals. If you want your proposal to stand out, create your benefit first and then your feature. Don't write it that way, but create it that way, design it that way, okay? So let me give you a simple example, what we use in our courses, for instance. Don't say, we have an umbrella, therefore it will protect you from the rain. If you think about your benefit first, you're going to think to yourself, let's say on a logistics support services contract for Army Eagle, for instance, you know that the incumbent's 5 deuces, deuce and a half, 5 tons, tires are going flat because they don't have awnings, for instance. I'm using a simple approach with an example to help people remember this, right? So you're going to go in there and you're going to say, at no additional cost to the government, we are going to create awnings. Here is a, drawing of what the motor pool is going to look like. This is where these vehicles are. Your current vehicles consist of this. We're going to have awnings. We're going to make sure there's enough heat so that they don't get flat tires. We don't have to continue doing PMCS. This will help the Army's readiness rate to deploy 95% of its vehicles within the allocated time versus have to take time to do maintenance. I can tell you this because I came out of the Army and I was a logistics and engineer. That was my MOS. So hopefully that will resonate when you're talking to commercial, that will resonate as well. How is a current contractor approaching that? If they are an incumbent, if it's a new opportunity, what do we think the competition solution is going to be? And then how do we mitigate that and say ours is better? That's the type of thing we're doing, rather than just saying, we have an awning, it's going to help your vehicles. Unfortunately, that's what we see a lot of contractors doing in their proposals. And then the question becomes what you see in all your reviews, because you got like 26 people, or maybe yourself, just you're one team, if you're a smaller business, saying, so what? So if you develop your benefit first and you directly tie the benefit to the client need and to the competition solution, that's where your feature is going to be strongest. So that's one thing that we recommend. That's advanced proposal writing. It's not just saying we have this feature and here's the benefit. How does it tie back to the client? How is it stronger than the competition's either current solution or anticipated, depending on if there's an incumbent or if it's new. The next step is importance of developing strong discriminators and win strategies. Again, there is no way of doing that in a silo without knowing what's important to the client and what the competition has lined up. If we're talking about a large vehicle IDIQ, well, you got thousands of competitors. We're not worried about that because that's not essentially best value direct award. However, we do have to make compliance there. So we do have to keep that in mind. In the narrative sections, we can still weave in discriminators. It does not hurt us, right? But this is primarily for best value single award. We're trying to position you in the best stance possible to win. So the role of data is very effective in developing proposal content. Examples of features and benefits derived from data analysis. You cannot beat that. I'll give you another example before we go to the next slide because this is so important. And again, it's to give you a visual, right? If we know, because we did what Kevin said, and we now have an understanding of our competition and what the client wants as a hypothetical, we know that the competition has a retention and staffing problem. In government contracting, this is huge. Because for the government, risk is everything. This is why you have a management plan with a transition plan, with a badge flipping plan, if it's a classified contract, with a staffing plan, a bench of candidates. Everybody is going to have that because that's part of the requirement in the management volume. How do you make yours more sophisticated and have it be the far exceeds? You need to know what the client wants and what the competition is doing. Let's say there's an incumbent there and they're weak as far as their retention is concerned. They're having a lot of turnover. They're not able to fill these positions on time. This is a huge issue for the client. So here, knowing what you know because you did that research versus just writing a sentence where we see a lot of contractors. I cannot tell you how many times we've seen this. They say in their management plans, for instance, we have a robust staffing plan with a bench of qualified candidates, and we will backfill all of these positions expeditiously. How many points do we get for that right now? Not that many. That's because every proposal that's being submitted is going to say that. So even if the client wants to score you for that, they cannot, because all it is adjectives and there's no data in there. So here, no one's going to come to the table in their management plan and say, we do not have a staffing plan. We've never staffed before. Our transition is not seamless. And, because that presents a risk. So they're all going to say that. So how do you make yours go from outstanding to far exceeds? This is what you say, for example, and this comes from data. You've collected your data, you know, here's where the issue is, and you say, while we understand that staffing is very important on this, our retention rate on these contracts that are similar to include contract X, Y, and Z within the past 3 years have been 93.9%. Here's a table of our contracts. Here's where our retention is. We've only lost 2 people, and that's because the position was downsized by the client, for instance. We have X amount of recruiters. We have 362 people on the pipe with exclusive letters of intent. Now I'm saying 362 to get your example, but letters of commitment. We backfill these positions within 7 days or less. Most contractors do it within 2 weeks. We have done it on every single contract for every single position for the past 3 years, and here's how we did it. Now you're looking at getting points. If you don't have that data, you cannot. So that is advanced proposal writing. It's the data that goes in there. And with that, we can go to the next slide. So here, these are just conclusion essentially slides, so I won't spend too much time on the rest of this because it's essentially bringing together what Kevin and I said. You have the examples, client requirements analysis, understand the client beyond the RFP, analyze, structure their needs, and write to that. Use GovWin to learn about your client and tools that are similar. Competitor analysis, same thing. Find out what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, not by naming them, but saying, well, we understand that in the industry, because this is a prototyping effort, research and development, sometimes schedules have been missed. We plan on being ahead of schedule as we were on the past 3, contracts similar in size, scope, and complexity by doing this, and then tell them what that solution is, right? Without doing a competitor analysis, we can't do that. Develop effective differentiators. That means content-driven differentiators, and leverage GovWin to find out what your competition is doing, at least get a head start. And with that, we go to the next slide, which is our final slide. So this is integrate as much research and data into your proposals as possible. When we say advanced proposal writing, it's not about writing a proposal beautifully in 24 karat gold. Nowadays, AI can do that. Now we do have an AI PWIN tool. That's a different webinar for a different day. That's actually going to be our next Shipley webinar. GovWin has AI tools as well. Having said that, that will make your proposal very solid from a writing perspective. I mean, before that, I used to tell my participants, if you write it in 24 karat gold, it will make no difference if you don't have the data to put in there. So shift the focus of your proposals. When we say strength, we mean in data and research and intelligence gathering. So from your company, rather than starting your proposal with company superhero is best because we do X, Y, and Z, it's going to be the client wants this. This is where they are right now. This is where they'd like to get. This is how we're going to get them there. This is how far they got with the competition or the current solutions. This is why ours is better in a nutshell. And I think with that, we can conclude. We do have additional tools. We can go to the next slide. I can show you where there are additional tools where we discuss these components. We have the Shipley Proposal Writer book, the Capture Manager, the playbooks. All of those are on our website. Going on to the next slide, you can email me at the following email, and I can give you all of this information. We do not charge you for you asking us a question, obviously, and we can guide you to the right POCs. So please feel free to contact us. And with that, we will go to questions and answers with no further delay. Thank you.
All right, so I've been taking note of some questions that have come in, and we'll only have time for a few. But the first one, Kevin, I would like to put to you first, and then Nia, if you have any follow-up, comments you'd like to make, then please make those. All right, so question number 1. That I think is on a lot of people's mind, and you already mentioned earlier. What are industry trends or insights with respect to the new administration that impacts to the procurement or acquisition process, etc.? And what changes should we anticipate to include in our proposal responses, if any?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think The acquisition environment is one we expect to change quite a bit with GSA taking on a very different role. There's been speculation about GSA taking on acquisition management for certain smaller agencies, especially with the reduction in force. Is there an opportunity for GSA to sort of lean in to help agencies? So paying attention to your customer and who's actually going to be reviewing the proposals that you submit is going to be really, really important. And then I think, as we think about just some of the changes that are taking place in agencies and being super aware of the turnover in certain agencies, how it's affecting various functions, and to what extent those functions affect your proposal, and the staffing level of those agencies in those areas is definitely something that you're going to want to have as sort of real-time information in your proposal that you're working on, so that you can make sure it's speaking correctly to the agency and their current environment, especially since changes are happening so quickly.
All right, thank you. Nia, did you have anything to add?
I do not.
Okay, then let's move on to our next question. So Nia, I'll pose this to you first, and Kevin, again, if you have any comments, please make them. If we are short on time after an RFP has dropped and we did not have enough time to conduct capture, what steps should be taken to position ourselves for the highest PWIN?
Thanks, Mallory. That's a great question. We get that in our courses all the time. It seems to be a general trend and a concern for everyone, and I appreciate that. I would say, to reiterate what we discussed, the client comes first, their needs. This is general change management industry processes. It's not things that Shipley created. I wish we could take ownership for that, but we don't. It's where is the client? Where do they want to be? How far have they gotten so far, and how can our solution help them, which is more beneficial than our competition? So in order to do that, the first thing you want to do, if the RFP dropped and you're running capture simultaneously writing, and I keep saying this because we are familiar with this, whether we want to be or not, you have to get a good understanding for that client, and there's been no intimacy. However, just going on their website and then copying and pasting their mission statement, we see that so many times, and the client recognizes their own mission statement. They wrote it. So that essentially turns the scorer off, because that's not going to be far exceeds. It's simply not. So to understand what the client's needs are, get together with your teammates, get together with people in the industry who have been on this contract, and then find out, what is this client trying to accomplish? Do they have money? What makes them look good? That's where you start, and then you move to the next step, which is the competition. What are they doing to address this, and how can we beat them? If you are short on time, do not skip those two steps. Don't just start writing about our company and our team is great because we do X, Y, and Z. You can't far exceed necessarily like that, depending on who is bidding and who your client is. For these large, sophisticated opportunities, that the more sophisticated and larger they are, the more competition there's going to be, and the more sophisticated the solutioning will be. So that's where we have to anticipate that we have to be highly competitive. So with that, we can go to the next one.
Okay, so this one, I like this question a lot personally. Okay, so Nia, I'll pose this one to you. We are told to make our proposals compelling. But what does that really mean from an objective perspective? What are some best practices for crafting compelling proposals? And I assume it's not just writing in 24 karat gold.
Very expensive proposal, but I've seen more expensive. That's what we're here for, right? I'm joking. No, I like that question as well, because we keep saying compelling and compliant, but do we really know what that means? Compliant means, from a quantitative perspective, making the minimum requirements. I'll give an example of this because it will stick. For past performance citations, for instance, and if you have business to business, you won't have formal past performance citations like you do in government contracting. However, what they call it is relevant experience, right? There is going to be relevant experience section, and I'll tell you why. It's risk mitigation. If you've done something 71 times, chances are you've done it successfully, you're going to do it successfully 72nd time if it is similar in size, scope, and complexity, unless there is an anomaly. That's what they're trying to measure with past performance. So where we see the difference between outstanding or even compliance versus far exceeds is, let's say the opportunity is $50 million. We are now presenting something at $45 million. It has, with $50 million, it's probably going to have about 30 full-time employees, depending on the level of effort. Now we're saying we have 17, and there are 14 tasks, and we've done 7. That's barely making compliance. It is certainly not making far exceeds, because in order to make far exceeds, you're going to need to be at above 50 million, above 30 full-time employees, and above the 14 tasks. Am I saying that we're going to get that ideally? Normally we don't. But that's why we team. That's why we prepare. That's why we use our team's past performance, not so that we can show we can't manage a contract and they're carrying our entire volume, but that's to the best of our ability, we position ourselves that way. So quantitatively, to make compelling, you have to exceed in size, scope, and complexity. Exceed what? The client's requirements, their needs, and your competition solution. It's that simple. I know it sounds simple, right? It's not in practice, but that's what the concept comes down to quantifiably, far exceeding client needs, competitor solutions. Kevin, did you have anything on that?
Yeah, I was just going to comment maybe on the past question and this one, because I hear oftentimes that companies say, hey, if an opportunity comes out and we didn't know anything about it, we have no business bidding it. And I think, while on the one hand it's not a great idea to bid on something don't know anything about, when you're breaking into a new agency, you're going to find situations where something came out and you don't know about it, and you still want to get to know that agency. You certainly want to discount your PWIN. But I think there's still some things you can do in terms of weaving market data and insights into your proposal that you can use to sort of shore up your capabilities and make it look like to the customer that you know them maybe a lot better than you actually do. I do remember still to this day a CIO from the federal agency that will remain anonymous that said, we often get the comment that if a task order comes out and you didn't know about it, we've already decided who we want to award it to. And he said, we're not that smart, we're not that thoughtful, we're not that sort of risky. If we put something out, we're really looking for legitimate bids. So I don't think the fact that you don't know something should exclude you from bidding. But it does get to me where this opportunity to really take an honest assessment of your capabilities versus the companies you're likely going to compete against, and just really sort of like being honest with yourself about whether you have a competitive position or not. You might have great past performance that puts you in a great position, even though you haven't done work in that agency before. And then I think to the point about specificity and data in terms of what's compelling, they definitely don't want word salad where they read something and they still don't know what you're going to do. You want to be specific about what you're going to do. And to your point, Nia, you want to be data-based in that as well. So where they read something, they understand exactly what you're going to do and where your history is of how you've done it effectively before. That, I think, is what's going to make you compelling. So make sure you're not writing word salad, which is something I see a lot of companies do when they're sort of having, I would say, novice proposal writers working on it. They're trying to write to the requirements, but they're being very vague about exactly what the specifics are.
Awesome. Thank you. I love the phrase word salad. I think I'm going to use it going forward.
We're going to coin it.
Absolutely. All right. Final question. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. Okay, Neil, I'll pose it to you first. And Kevin, please chime in. What are the most common pitfalls, in advanced proposal writing, and how can we avoid them?
We can tell you this from the amount of proposals that we have seen where the client calls us and tells us they had a really good proposal. And to Kevin's point, that there seems to be a notion out there that everything is pre-wired. It may or may not be. There is a human component to every business. It's not business doing business with businesses. It's people doing business with people, and with the government as well. It's people doing business with people in the government. So although there is a element of that, it may or may not be pre-rigged, as we call it in our industry. But having said that, you can make it very difficult for whoever it's potentially set aside for to get more points than you do by being data driven. The mistakes that we have seen, or the ones that haven't won, and we get to see the debriefs that they're provided. We have clients that call us and say, we wrote a masterpiece and we're going to send you this masterpiece, and this is why we know that it was rigged, and we read it and we don't need to see the RFP to know that this potentially may not have been a masterpiece. and this may not have been rigged. Most of those, to answer your question specifically, start off in the first sentence with team X, Y, and Z is great because we do this stuff. Every single proposal is going to say their team is great and they do this stuff. Again, no one's going to come and say their team is not great and they don't do this stuff. So that's the pitfall that we see the most. It's the proposal is corporation heavy, meaning that it is speaking to its own, core competency strengths, but they're not necessarily matched to the client's and the competition's positioning. So they may or may not hit the requirements. So as we see this a lot in past performance citations where the entire thing was written by a technical SME, potentially a PM that was leading the program, and it's talking about tasks they don't even do on this contract. That could be anything. This could be, rocket science, but if it's not applicable to this opportunity, you are wasting significantly expensive real estate where you could be collecting points. So the biggest mistakes that we see are starting off with your organization, your solution, instead of having a client-centric proposal. Kevin, did you have any final thoughts on our last question?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think, and I'm sure you tell clients this all day long in your world, but proper capture and preparedness is critical for a successful proposal. And this is obviously something that happens way before the RFP drops and you're working on the proposal. I've seen, lots of companies who have had great preparation in the proposal that have been hamstrung because they didn't do proper capture. Maybe they didn't have the chance to really form relationships with the government decision makers before it got into the acquisition stage. And so they don't have the depth of relationships that some other competitors might have. Maybe they showed up and they realized there's some compliance requirements that they're going to have to satisfy, that they're now scurrying to try to figure out, can we get this in time? Approved accounting system, business system, ISO certification, like those types of things can really, there's some things that you just, when the proposal drops or the RFP drops, there's some things you just can't manufacture enough time to do if you're just starting in that stage. So I think really preparedness and proper capture to make sure you're well prepared when that RFP comes out to do a proper proposal is really a critical element, I think.
Excellent. Thank you both so much for answering those questions. And to all of you who have submitted questions that we didn't answer, we do read all of them. So, when we get a lot of questions that we hear about, we provide more webinars on that topic. So we're grateful for those questions. Thank you for them.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you all for joining us and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to join you.
Thank you.